Federal judge lifts final block on Trump mail-in voting order, clearing way for midterm restrictions. The practical change is that the administration's mail ballot plan can move from courtroom theory toward election office implementation. The rule described in the package would require officials to give USPS voter information and use federally reviewed, uniquely barcoded ballot envelopes. Reuters reported that the judge criticized the Postal Service's handling of the rule but still would not keep the injunction in place. Axios and Politico both framed the ruling as the removal of the last nationwide obstacle, while PBS noted that states filed a new challenge ahead of the midterms. That means the legal fight is not over. It has shifted from a broad stop order to a race over timing, compliance, and new claims. For voters, the stakes are whether mail access, ballot design, and verification rules change before local administrators finish preparations. Election offices now have to interpret federal instructions while protecting deadlines that are normally set months in advance. The next concrete signals are fresh docket entries, USPS guidance, state election notices, and county-level instructions that say whether the policy can be applied in 2026. If the Postal Service cannot operationalize the barcode and voter data pieces cleanly, the next dispute may be about administrative readiness rather than presidential authority. Nearly 1,000 are missing in Nepal and Tibet after floods caused by a glacial collapse. The reported disaster is not just a weather story. It combines a high mountain failure, fast water, missing person searches, and damaged routes on both sides of the border. Xinhua said mudslides in Tibet caused by the collapse left 3 people dead and 558 missing. Nepalese police separately reported at least 162 deaths, while Reuters said experts believe a glacier collapse may have triggered the flash flood. NPR and The Guardian highlighted the scale of the missing, with The Guardian saying many were tourists near the Tibet border. Those details matter because rescue crews must account for residents, visitors, roads, bridges, and communications at the same time. The first public number may change as isolated valleys report in and as duplicate missing person lists are reconciled. Families need confirmed names, not just regional totals, and officials need safe access, working roads, fuel, medical triage, translators, and communications before searches can expand across remote mountain valleys safely. The next useful updates are rescue bulletins, border area casualty lists, hospital confirmations, aid access routes, weather windows, bridge assessments, and explanations of what caused the collapse. Hospitals, local police, and tourism officials also need matching counts so families are not left comparing separate Nepal, Tibet, and tour operator lists. Meta agrees to pay $18 billion to settle U.S. lawsuits over children's social media addiction. The central issue is not only the headline dollar amount. It is whether the settlement changes how young users experience the company's platforms every day. The Washington Post described sweeping changes along with an $18 billion payout in a landmark state agreement. CNBC reported a Californian state's figure of $16.7 billion, while the New York Times described a total that could reach $17.1 billion under the final terms. AP focused on proposed safeguards, including time limits and a midnight cutoff, and noted that critics say the changes still may not go far enough. A separate Washington Post account said teen accounts could face 2-hour daily limits and no late-night use. For parents, regulators, and rival platforms, the stakes are whether enforcement details matter more than the press release number. The settlement could become a template for age design, notifications, parental controls, and future claims against social media companies. Courts and states will still have to translate broad promises into measurable duties. The next signals are filed settlement terms, implementation deadlines, compliance reports, and any objections from families or state attorneys general. If courts accept the deal, the hardest test will be whether children actually see changed defaults, not merely new language in account settings. Canada's tariffs target certain U.S. states. See which regions are most vulnerable. The immediate point is that retaliation can land unevenly, with export-heavy regions feeling pressure before the national numbers fully show the damage. CBS identified the question of vulnerable states, while Politico said Canada hit back with counter-tariffs on American goods. The New York Times described levies of up to 50%, and Al Jazeera reported that more than 700 products were covered. CNN warned that the expanding trade fight could hurt Americans, which means the story reaches beyond diplomats and into producers, distributors, and shoppers. Auto trade talks are especially sensitive because parts and finished vehicles can cross the border repeatedly. Customs guidance now becomes a real business document, not background paperwork, because it decides which products face a higher cost at the border. Companies may delay shipments, seek exemptions, reroute inventories, or reprice contracts while negotiators argue over sector-specific relief and retaliation risk. Regions tied to agriculture, autos, metals, and consumer goods have the clearest exposure. The next signals are formal tariff schedules, court orders, customs notices, exemption requests, and trade talk statements that show whether either government narrows the list. State officials and business groups will look for exemptions or carve-outs where a targeted industry is politically important or deeply integrated with Canadian buyers. Republican with same name as incumbent Dan Sullivan advances from Alaska U.S. Senate primary. The unusual part is simple but consequential. Voters could see Senator Dan Sullivan and another Republican named Dan Sullivan in the same general election environment. PBS reported that the namesake candidate advanced from the primary, and the New York Times called it a headache for Republicans. The Washington Post said Dan Sullivan joins Dan Sullivan on the November ballot, while Politico and other outlets described the challenger as the other person with the same name. That creates a ballot clarity problem rather than a normal ideological contrast. Campaigns may have to emphasize occupation, biography, party status, photos, and ballot descriptions so voters know which candidate is which. Election officials can confirm eligibility, but they cannot solve every confusion risk created by identical names. The incumbents team now has an incentive to make recognition and official campaign branding central to every mailer and advertisement. The challenger gains attention because the name itself turns a minor race detail into a statewide story. The next concrete records are Alaska ballot design, candidate statements, court or election office guidance if any disputes arise, and polling that shows whether voters distinguish the two campaigns. Local news coverage and sample ballots therefore become unusually important, because a voter mistake could change how support is measured on election night. Trump signs order banning some foreign equipment from U.S. energy grid. The policy is about critical infrastructure risk, not a routine procurement preference. Reuters reported the signed order, and Bloomberg said the policy targets overseas components in power infrastructure. Fox Business warned utilities could be forced to replace foreign power equipment, which is where the cost and reliability questions begin. Cyberscoop connected the decision to cyber threats affecting energy infrastructure, while U.S. News also tracked the formal action. The order's real effect depends on definitions. Which countries, components, software systems, replacement parts, and future purchases are covered. Utilities will need federal guidance before they can know whether existing transformers, control systems, or grid management tools must be swapped out. Customers could feel the issue through construction schedules, rate requests, or reliability planning if replacement windows are tight. Security officials will argue the risk is concentrated in hidden access and supply chain dependency. Industry groups will likely press for timelines that protect power delivery while meeting the ban. The next useful documents are Energy Department guidance, utility compliance plans, cost estimates, procurement deadlines, vendor audits, and any emergency exceptions built into the rule. Regulators also need to decide whether the ban covers only new purchases or requires removal of equipment that is already connected to the grid. ICE arrested a record number of people without criminal records in summer enforcement surge, new data shows. The key distinction is that the package focuses on people without criminal records, so the debate is about the reach of civil immigration enforcement rather than a crime sweep. CBS reported the record count, and The Guardian said ICE arrested 50,000 people in July, the biggest month in Trump's second term. NPR also described immigration arrests soaring to that 50,000 mark, while The Hill said detentions reached a second-term high. The Portland Press-Herald added a local measure, reporting that Maine saw more arrests this year than in the previous 2 years combined. Those source lines point to a nationwide surge with visible state-level effects. Supporters will describe the pattern as enforcement of removal rules. Critics will focus on families, workplaces, courts, and people with no criminal history. The numbers also raise operational questions about detention capacity, case backlogs, and regional priorities. Any later correction should separate arrests, detentions, removals, and people still contesting their cases. The next signals are agency data releases, court filings, state-by-state breakdowns, and local reports showing whether July was a peak or a new baseline. Immigration lawyers will also watch whether more people are moved far from their home courts, because distance can change access to counsel and documents. August 26, 2026, Iran war latest. The story is a snapshot of several connected risks rather than one single battlefield claim. Reuters framed the moment through 6 consequences of 6 months of conflict in Iran, which signals that the impact now reaches politics, security, shipping, and diplomacy. CNN treated the date as a live update, while the Institute for the Study of War and Critical Threats continued publishing Iran assessments. AP reported a specific warning. Iran raised the possibility of a military ship ban in Hormuz under a potential deal with Oman. That matters because the Strait of Hormuz is a strategic chokepoint, and even talk of naval restrictions can affect regional planning. The package also flags Tehran's response, U.S. red lines, and broader Middle East security as the main items to track. Viewers should separate confirmed actions from negotiating positions, because public threats can be aimed at bargaining as much as battlefield movement. The legal and diplomatic records may reveal whether outside governments are trying to contain the war or prepare for escalation. The next useful signals are Tehran statements, U.S. briefings, Oman-related diplomacy, shipping advisories, naval posture changes, and fresh regional security assessments. Energy traders and Gulf governments will read any Hormuz language carefully, because a ship ban proposal could alter insurance, routing, and naval posture. 3 pro-Israel Democrats given key roles on House Foreign Affairs panel. The significance is procedural as much as ideological. Committee posts shape hearings, amendments, oversight priorities, and which bills move first. The Guardian reported the appointments, and Al Jazeera said the lawmakers were picked for top roles on a key U.S. House committee. The Hill described the House Foreign Affairs Committee as adding pro-Israel Democrats, while Axios followed the political implications. Those reports point to a shift inside the Democratic side of a panel that handles Middle East policy, aid debates, sanctions, and diplomatic oversight. The appointments shape how aggressively the committee questions administration policy and how it frames votes related to Israel, Iran, and regional security. They also create a test for party unity, because Democrats have visible internal disagreements over Gaza, security aid, and conditions on foreign assistance. Committee leadership does not decide every floor vote, but it controls much of the early agenda. Advocacy groups will read these choices as a signal about where House Democrats want emphasis. The next records to watch are hearing schedules, subcommittee assignments, coalition votes, and statements from members who object or endorse the lineup. The story is therefore less about one press release than about who gets leverage when committee text, witness lists, and oversight letters are drafted. CIA Director John Ratcliffe warned Russia not to attack NATO during secretive trip. The known public record points to a rare intelligence channel warning delivered during a Moscow visit that was not initially transparent. Politico reported that the CIA chief used the trip to warn Russia against attacks on NATO allies and that the talks also intersected with Iran diplomacy. Al Jazeera said the Kremlin acknowledged meetings with Russian intelligence officials, but said there was no Putin meeting. Reuters likewise reported that the U.S. spy chief met Russian counterparts, while The Independent described Trump breaking his silence on the mysterious visit. The Wall Street Journal characterized the travel as a surprise trip. The important distinction is that a backchannel does not equal a policy agreement. It can be a warning, a test of intentions, or a way to avoid public escalation. For NATO members, the reported message matters because it sets a line around allied territory even while other conflicts compete for attention. For Russia, acknowledging the meeting without naming a Putin encounter narrows what the Kremlin is willing to confirm. The next useful signals are official readouts, allied reactions, Kremlin statements, and whether future military incidents match or test the warning. Intelligence veterans will also watch whether the visit produces quieter deconfliction channels or simply becomes another contested episode in U.S.-Russia messaging.